Hello my dears, welcome back to another video. Today we are going to be talking about consent. No, this is not your sex ed class. I want to be talking about the sexual revolution and how it's changed the way we talk about consent as well as sexual experiences, etc. This is something that I've been thinking about, especially after seeing feminists such as Louise Perry, who released the book The Case Against the Sexual Revolution, reading her work and also seeing her in interviews discuss how the ways in which women are now able to talk about sexual experiences has changed so much, and it's kind of caused quite some complications. And so I want to discuss that with you in this video because I can see a lot of truth in the stuff that she argues. So let's get into how we got here. Decades ago, the Western world abandoned its historically Christian views on sexual morality and instead embraced the liberal feminist sex-positive philosophy as its new ethos. We threw out our old understandings of sexual norms and decided that consent was all that matters. Along the way, we threw out old vocabulary like chivalry and gentlemanly behavior because the liberal feminists made it clear that these words were outdated and sometimes demeaning, because women should be treated just like men. Because yes, ladies, you can open your own door and you can pull out your own chair. You can't seem to pay for your own meal though. That seems to be where people draw the line. Equality, but not that kind of equality. You're not a maniac. The new sex-positive ethos was able to be set into motion because of new technological advancements such as the contraceptive pill. The pill allowed women better control over their fertility, and with this biological restraint now removed from women, it made it more easier for them to level out the playing field and to pursue sex like men. And so they did. Casual sex became more normalized and the stigma that was once held around it began to fade. Only there was one key problem that the liberal feminists did not account for, and that was the psychological differences between men and women and the differences between male and female sexuality. The sexual revolution was supposed to create a fun, utopian world where sex could just be a fun leisure activity, but it did unfortunately run into some problems along the way. However, for the playboys, this new world was a dream come true for them. The men who had multiple options and wanted to have limitless sex without having to commit to any women, this new world was brilliant, and this was the world they were able to thrive in. And this is why you'll find figures like Hugh Hefner played their part in helping to push the sexual revolution.
One of the points, I know that in a little while we're going to be talking with some feminists here tonight, I think that sexual emancipation and female emancipation work hand in hand, and that the sexual revolution that's taken place here is one of the greatest boons to female emancipation, because the women have the most to gain. It's women that have really had that really second-class citizenship role at best, and at least really have been an object and have paid dearly for it in the centuries past.
Within this new culture, men and women are socialized to believe that there are no differences between them sexually. Men are taught that women are equally as up for it as they are, and that women enjoy sex in the same way that men do. And yes, women love sex, but not exactly in the same way that men do. It seems that even sex-positive feminists started to realize that on average, women were not quite having the same feelings about casual sex as men, and articles started to pop up to help them get through it. 4 tips for hooking up without catching feelings, according to a relationship counselor. 12 ways to not fall for a guy you're casually hooking up with. How to navigate casual sex and feelings, according to sex experts. The reality is, women are far more likely to develop an attachment to someone they're sleeping with regularly, even if they're not in a committed relationship. They also have a much lower threshold for sexual disgust, or they're much more likely to get the ick, as the kids are saying. This new sex-positive ethos also completely ignores the biological differences between men and women, which isn't too surprising because liberal feminists do have a habit of ignoring biology because it often conflicts with their goals. Because men have much higher levels of testosterone, they typically have much higher sex drives. On average, women tend to be a lot more agreeable than men, which means it's a lot easier to pressure them into doing things that they don't want to do. Now pair that with the fact that on average women also tend to be a lot smaller and also physically weaker than men, and this combination can lead to some tricky situations. This has led to multiple instances of women saying that they felt pressured into doing sexual things that they didn't want to do, either because they felt pressure from the person they were sleeping with, or they felt pressure to conform to our sex-positive culture. Feminist author Louise Perry argues that because the liberal feminists threw out all our old sexual norms and also throughout all our old vocabulary, the only thing they left us with was consent. We no longer have the vocabulary anymore to describe negative sexual experiences that aren't quite illegal but are still bad. It's put us in a situation where, because consent is all we have left, the only way we can now talk about these experiences is through the framework of consent, and the only terms that are still available to us are the legal ones, such as rape, sexual assault, or sexual harassment. This could be why some people have noticed that the threshold for what we consider to be rape, sexual assault, or sexual harassment seems to be a lot lower than it used to be, with people sharing interesting takes like this on social media. And this perspective has led to memes like this and tweets like this, as well as discussions like this.
Ava, your point about, if men were that alpha, then they wouldn't be that bothered by this, doesn't really help us when it comes to boys growing up. And that is one of my worries, that for teenage boys now, they are so terrified of the consequences of putting a foot out of line. It's hard enough being a young teenager, working out how things are, working out how to do dating and all of that, without the terror that if you touch in the wrong place at the wrong time, you may find that your whole life is destroyed.
See, I
and there
like
is
that
far
terror.
too much. Well,
I like that.
As a
I
mother
think
of
that
a
men should
teenage
be
boy, I
frightened.
don't like
Really?
that
That's the
terror.
most
I do.
malicious thing I've ever heard.
That is
I think that
awful.
men should be frightened
I think
to
you'd
touch
feel
women in a way
differently
that
if you
they're
were,
not
if
comfortable
you were.
with.
But we're talking about
Yeah, but we're not
teenage
talking
years,
about. We're
children.
not talking about.
We're talking
but
about
it's an
young
interesting
children.
thing that you see. I would say that attitude actually is part of the problem too.
It is.
That's to me toxic femininity.
It is.
That is saying you should all be terrified, you men, if you put one.
Of assaulting.
Well, I think we all understand what sexual
What is
assault
an
is.
assault?
What Isabel's talking about is that young teenage clumsiness
really
in many
hard.
cases, which is now being recategorized as assault. Is that a problem?
It's not being recategorised as assault. It's always been assault. It's just we're finally talking about it.
I don't agree with that.
That's
But
ridiculous.
Teenage boy fumbling with
a touch
teenage
on the
girl
knee.
is not,
Not
it's
even
not
that.
in most cases assault, is
Do
it?
you remember Aziz Ansari, right? Half the heels of Me Too, half the heels of Harvey Weinstein rightly being dragged through the courts, and it should have got way worse than just prison time, in my opinion. Aziz Ansari had a consensual relationship with a woman. She felt a bit awkward, and afterwards rescinded consent, and he was lumped in, and he had his
No,
career
I'm with you on that
largely
one.
cancelled.
I'm with
so
you.
then why should men be afraid of that?
Because he didn't touch her without consent, did he?
No, but she
But
rescinded his consent, and
how are
she
young
saw
boys
that then
supposed to
as the same
navigate
thing.
this, the whole
Yeah, I
thing?
agree.
I'm thinking
Well, you
of
need
my
to have-
teenage son. He's 14, 15. What's he supposed to say? Would you mind if I put
Isabel,
my
you are an
hand-
extremely
I mean, come
strong
on,
woman. I
come
know
on.
in your house you're teaching them the difference between assault and then
Of
coming
course,
on
of
to
course.
someone. I know you are.
But what we're talking about is it's been very interesting watching the Me Too movement and the Time's Up movement, how it's all developed. Because a lot of very bad people, Harvey Weinstein and others, got their due comeuppance. We can all agree with that.
Yeah.
This is not even something to be debated. We're really talking about the grey line, right? Where is that grey line?
Yeah.
How do you navigate it? When you're an experienced adult and you've been around the block in many ways, you can navigate that much more intelligently and with emotional intelligence than you can if you're a teenage boy. And I think the point Isabel makes is a good one. I've had 3 sons in their 20s. I've always taught them to be respectful to women, and I believe they are. But I do think it's really hard for a 16, 17-year-old boy now in this environment to know even how to
They are all
having kind of some
terrified.
kind of physical relationship with a woman.
Those good boys are all terrified. I know that from talking to my son. He's just like, I'm just not going there. Is that healthy?
Yes, I
The
think
other
it is
point-
actually. I think it's better to not have a physical relationship than to have one that could ruin a woman's life.
And so this takes us to the issue of allegations. There are some men who think that there are women who go out of their way to maliciously make up allegations in order to ruin men's lives. And I'm not going to deny that women like that absolutely do exist. There are a minority of women who are definitely vindictive enough to do things like that, and we've seen examples of them. I do also think that there could be something else going on here. There seems to be a portion of women who genuinely believed that they were either assaulted or raped, even if what they describe doesn't fit our legal definition or fit our traditional understanding of what these words mean. And since post-revolution, because we threw out all of our old sexual norms and we also threw out all of the old vocabulary, people no longer have the words to describe the things that happen in the grey area. And this is especially a problem in a sex-positive society where people are having casual sex, because oftentimes people are having sex with people who they don't know very well. And so because they don't know each other very well, they may not know what the person does or doesn't like, or what the person is and isn't comfortable with. And this is especially a problem because the reality is when people have sex, they don't announce everything they're going to do to the person before they do it. Can you imagine if they did that? I'm going to relocate you into a different sex position now. I shall be commencing this maneuver in 3, 2, 1. So since that isn't how your normal average person has sex, often what's happening is people are having sex with people who they don't really know that well. And so they're doing certain things that they don't know are going to be received negatively. Especially because a lot of the time, young men are just imitating what they see in porn. And they don't realize they've done anything wrong until the girl reacts badly. But by that point, it's often already too late. And because we no longer have a way of communicating these negative sexual experiences that are more within the grey area, the only thing that people have to cling on to is the consent framework and also these other legal terms. So when they are describing these negative sexual experiences, they will describe them through the lens of consent and these legal terms. And that can sometimes cause some problems and lead to allegations. Now, I don't personally think that most of the time this is done maliciously. I do genuinely believe that these women view these experiences in that way. I do think that they honestly believe that that is what's happened to them, because this is the only other way they know how to describe it. Often what these women are experiencing is regret over certain decisions they made, or they may be experiencing distress over the fact that they ignored their instincts during these sexual interactions. And when it all goes wrong and they start to experience emotional turmoil over the sexual experience, sometimes the person who gets the brunt of the blame is the person who was in the room with them. The man. The same man who's also been socialized to believe that she's just like him. She's just as up for it as he is. She's just as eager, because women love sex the same way men do. Because after all, the sex-positive liberal feminists told him that we can have sex just like the boys. It's always fascinating to me how men and women can recall the exact same incident in two very different ways. Sometimes their perceptions are literally day and night in terms of how different they are.
My name's Cody. I had a one-night stand with Madison.
My name is Madison. I had a one-night stand with Cody.
We had gone to her room, and then I think I had kissed her a little bit, and we were laying on the bed.
Like, the actual initiation of sex was kind of weird.
And I think that she got a little upset, and she said that she didn't want to have sex, and she just wanted to hang out.
I had talked about not being sure that I wanted to continue and him really wanting to, and I don't know, I was so on the fence about it.
I understood the way she felt, and I didn't want to push anything if she didn't want to do it.
And then what happened?
A little later, I may have initiated kissing. She seemed into it. Everything was good.
And then you said, I want to have sex?
So yeah, so I definitely said that I was going to have sex with him. Like, I said that I wanted to. I just was having a lot of nervousness. It was just kind of a weird mix of emotions all at once, and I didn't really have a good idea of how to be a good communicator when it came to, like, sexual desires.
Did you use protection?
We used protection, I do remember that. I feel like it was something weird, like a cherry-flavored condom or something like that.
I don't think that we used protection. He wasn't really wanting to, and that was definitely a factor of, like, my nervousness as well.
How long did it last?
It had lasted quite a while.
10 minutes.
We had started out in missionary, moved to several different positions.
I do distinctly remember this part. About halfway through into the sex, I just started to have this anxiety and panic and kind of weirdness. And in the middle of sex, when I get that way mentally, I start to disassociate. And I don't know that it was all that enjoyable for either of us.
I actually don't remember a lot of when we were having sex. I remember that it was good.
I guess this is one of the consequences of casual sex and promiscuity. I feel like we talk a lot about the consequences or the risks of female promiscuity, but we don't really talk too much about the potential risks of male promiscuity. And I would definitely say that this is one of the risks of male promiscuity. You could think that you're both having a great time, and then the next thing you know, you're catching a case. The reality is, within casual sex, oftentimes, because you don't really know the person very well, you don't know what they like, you don't know what they're comfortable with or what they do and don't want to do. And because when people are less familiar with each other, they also feel less comfortable to express themselves or to communicate or to even talk about sex before they have it, which makes it more likely that things like this can happen. Because where there's a lack of communication, it's a lot easier for things to go wrong. I do think at some point liberal feminists will have to confront the fact that some of the things they preach has actually contributed to some of the problems they complain about. Considering feminists are supposed to be looking out for the interests of women, I'm not entirely convinced that the sexual revolution made women's lives easier or better. The sexual revolution encouraged women to imitate male sexuality, which really mainly benefited the Hugh Hefners of the world. The sex-positive movement led to a more sexualized society, which created an environment where sex is often expected very quickly, which puts pressure on women to sleep with men much sooner than they'd like to in order to prevent them losing interest and moving on to someone else. But doing things you're not ready for increases the chances of you having a negative experience or potentially regretting it. Also, the expectation of sex has made some men a lot more forward because they assume that women are on the same page as them, which also adds to women feeling pressure to do things they're either not ready for or will potentially regret because they didn't actually want to do them. We also really need to talk about the flaws of the consent framework. Just because someone consents to something doesn't necessarily mean it's good. What if someone has a cannibalism fetish and consents to being killed and eaten? Should they be allowed to do it, and should that be okay just because they consented to it? And yes, that is a real story, by the way. This actually happened.
Armin Mivas is a cannibal. In March 2001, he killed a man and ate him, along with a glass of fine red wine. A crime so bizarre it horrified and mystified the world. You see, Mivas's victim was a willing accomplice. He actually wanted to be eaten. A rare case of what they call love cannibalism.
The answer is yes. There are some sex-positive feminists who do truly believe that consent is all that matters. And they even go as far as to say that people should be able to do unethical sexual acts as long as the person consents to it. In fact, here is one arguing that it's actually sex negativity that leads to sexual violence.
If we actually grappled with the fact that sex negativity is what causes this type of behavior, then we could create a world where in a idyllically sex-positive world, someone is able to pay conscious women to come and be drugged so that I can get my kink out, my fetish on having sex with unconscious people. There's a consensual way to do that.
If we've seen women experience a lot of distress over regretting even vanilla sexual experiences, can you imagine the level of psychological distress that could come from regretting to consenting to an experience like that? We don't need to imagine it because we've already seen it. We've seen ex-adult actresses express the after effects of agreeing to doing degrading things within the industry and how it negatively impacted them after. So can consent alone really be all that matters for sexual morality? Just because someone consents to something, does that make it okay? My personal opinion is that the consent framework is insufficient because consent alone is not enough to encourage good sexual behavior or to encourage good sexual morality. People also need the words to describe their negative sexual experiences that land within the grey area, because as we've seen, the removal of the words that we used to have has now meant that a lot of grey area cases are getting lumped in with much more serious sex crimes. But those are just my thoughts. Do let me know in the comments what you think. Do you think the consent framework is enough on its own to help ensure good sexual morality, or do we maybe need to bring back at least some of the old sexual norms and the old sexual cultural expectations that we used to have? Maybe we could bring back some of the really outdated stuff, like knowing someone's name before you sleep with them. All of that archaic stuff. But that is all for this video. Do let me know in the comments what your opinion on this is. I'd be very curious to hear them. If you've enjoyed this video, you may as well like and subscribe. I am also on other socials and I also make music if you'd like to check me out. Links to all of that will be in my description box. Thank you so much for giving me your time today and I will see you in my next video.